Alright, here we are guys, back for another Golf Clash tutorial here, and this is going to be for hole number 4 of the Eagle Peak, and it's also going to cover, let's see if I can get this real quick, highlight this tee box, third tee box. So the first thing to kind of make note of here is kind of where my driver line is pretty much going to fall for power 3 balls, which is pretty much what you're going to want for this hole, which is going to be right around here. This is going to be your wood side. This is going to be your driver's side. The driver's side case is really going to be very, very tough to do. It's really going to require a great deal amount of backspin in order to win this. For instance, probably the hardest wind that you can probably get for this hole would be a wind in this fashion. And especially if you have, a POC 4, a POC 5, they're going to be very, very nasty drivers to try to win this hole. So it's really going to limit your capabilities to what you can do. So let's talk about a few of the options that we have on this hole. And with that in mind, that you might need to cover yourself for this wind. Apocalypse not going to be a very strong driver for this tour because of that. You're almost going to set yourself up for an instant loss with a POC 4 and a 5 if this wind shows up. Unless, for some reason you have maybe a dead ball with a Cataclysm and you can still somehow manipulate this fairway and be able to run it up here. So that driver case is going to be pretty much non-existent. But there is going to be a couple isolated cases to where that you can do it, but it's going to be very, very challenging to do. It's going to be still very, very risky. Even getting to this side bunker here, might be enough for you to win on certain wins. So let's take a look here at priorities as to what you're going to pretty much use. Ideally, I would kind of maybe, I'm going to put up here towards the top of the list here, we're going to just throw kind of Hammerhead 6 in here as kind of priority 1. Next, I'm going to pretty much throw kind of Guardian 8, for instance. And it's okay if you don't have Guardian 8, but it's going to kind of change your priorities. This will fall down if it's a 6, for instance, but you can still use a 6. Just changes your power number and accuracy. Next, I'm going to put Sniper in here, but this one can be touch and go because it might not have the range. So let's take a look at kind of the minimum for sure is an 8, but ideally you're going to have a 10 here. And Cataclysm can be very, very small. But I'm going to just throw Cat 4 on here. It's kind of next in line. You can get away with a little bit smaller than that, but you're going to want Cataclysm 4, especially for your limited ball guide and accuracy. It's still going to be tough to win, but with perfect ball, no reason that you cannot play this. So even if you have one of these higher clubs, if I have Hammerhead 6 and I'm going up against Cat 1, I still need to execute. To make sure that that shot can't beat me. But in certain winds, they're definitely going to still be okay. But again, this wind specifically, this is going to kind of pretty much probably, if you see this wind on this hole, and you have weak drivers, both of you, you're pretty much going to, person that goes first is almost going to set themselves up to lose. Now granted, if there is some driver shots that we can use, but it's going to require very good drivers. So we're just kind of looking at, this case as being very tough for intermediate players. POC 4, POC 5, going to be very, very challenging to win. If you have to go first with that wind, good luck. It's going to be very, very tough. So let's take a look here. What I'll usually do, Let's take a look at this first shot. Is I'll play somewhere around here, usually with a lot of right spin, and kind of bounce it right along here and kind of up towards the hole. My typical side wind will be somewhere around 3 in terms of these are backspin values. As it starts to get up with the tailwind here, then we're going to start to crank this up to, potentially as much as 4. Keep in mind that ball guide's going to start stretching out. So in this tailwind case, we're going to need to kind of land towards the front here with our ball guide, and then it's going to actually expand out as much as after the wind plays and factors. It's going to, even if you have it up towards the front of this bunker, it's going to expand, and that bounce is actually going to land towards the fringe, which is going to be ideal. So that's what you'll want to do with the ball guide. It's kind of offset it a bit. So this is what you're looking at in terms of backspin for what's going to be ideal. Now, on these headwind cases, it's quite possible that you may or may not be able to pull off these cases, but you're really going to need to downshift that backspin significantly. I'm not even really going to talk about this headwind case because it's going to be really nasty for you to need to do it. Probably still possible. You could probably overpower it with some, and maybe use a 1 here, but this is going to require overpower and a very, very touchy land zone. It's going to be very, very tough to pull off. So let's take a look here. Ideally, with the headwind, I'm going to give you a different wind or a different shot type to go for this one. It's going to be a little bit easier than what I just suggested. So let's talk about the side wind case. What I'll usually do is very close to, max plus 20. Maybe max plus 25, somewhere in there, depending on how large it gets. So somewhere around max plus 20 to max plus 25%. So these are additional values. You need to at least go on that. For this tailwind case, I'll go a little bit closer to probably max plus 30. It tends to really overshoot a little bit on this shot. So you'll want to make sure that you're making the necessary corrections to factor that in. And, that should really help you there. For this headwind case, you can imagine, if the side wind here is down, max plus 20 to 30, if it's a little bit of side tail, I might go as much as, max plus 30. But you can imagine, with this headwind case, when you have to start going towards max plus 50, it starts to get very tough because you run out of rings that is actually potentially possible. So from time to time, you might have a berserker on and come into the shootout or whatever. You can potentially get away with this shot because you'll be able to go, 20 rings up here, and the line will be, pushing towards the max. And there's been a couple headwind cases where I can actually do that. And as I can mention, the spin's going to be right around maybe like a 1 backspin or something, and you'll just have to kind of, play the wind effect better than your opponent. But it is going to be something that's manageable. I can throw this case in here as just kind of a max plus 50, but it's almost kind of like an imaginary case. It's going to be very, very tough to be able to get that, but in isolation, you may be able to do that. So let's take a look at what's probably going to be our next best bet. So let me first talk about the clubs. Ideally, Thor's 6 or 7 is going to be kind of your top priority. Let's put Thor 5 below here. Well, actually, we could technically put Epoch 6 below here. So let me just throw Epoch 6 in first, and then Thor's 5 or 4, whatever. Doesn't matter, 4 or 5. So I'll just throw in, minimum 4 here. And Epoch 5 is going to be way down the list here. Epoch 4 to 5 is going to be way down. It's going to be very, 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 very challenging. Maybe even lower priority than Extra Mile, to be honest with you. So I could even throw Extra Mile kind of above Epoch 4. But then you'd have kind of Epoch 5 being right above Extra Mile. So what you're going to need is, you might need to cheat this land zone a little bit because you probably won't be able to put put it on the spot here. But if you put, 4 backspin right towards this front half target, you'll have to assume, since you can only probably put max to here in most cases, or min club to here, that you'll have to kind of assume like 2 or 3 rings already gone, for instance, which makes that shot even that much tougher. So you have to set up here on your wood typically and just try to tweak your spin. And kind of, if it's this wind specifically, then you're going to want to, use all your side spin, plus you'll probably need some curl to avoid this sand. So it's going to be a very tough shot, not to mention no room for error. It has to be perfect ball and perfect ring adjustment. Both have to be kind of perfect. And what I'll typically do with this wind is usually about max. So in this case, for this case, I'm going to use max. Now, the higher up I can get this, the better. So let's talk about kind of another case, because Thor 6 and 7 can land up here right in this open area, and this actually has some room for error. So what you'll usually do is kind of offset your guide and kind of, lean it. In fact, if you want to see this shot in action, I did it with a rocket. You do the exact same shot with Thor 6, and you can see how I offset my ball guide. And that's why this will be kind of your beast club for this hole. And what it requires for you to do this is max plus 20%. So pretty much universally will be max plus 20. If it got way, way, way up there, 15 miles per hour, 14 miles per hour, maybe max plus 30. And, if it was a really small wind, 9, no, even less, 8. For some reason you get 9, 8 miles per hour, then you could probably get away with max plus 10. So somewhere in the max plus 10, but potentially as much as max 30, you'll just have to scale it depending on the wind that you get. And then whoever offsets the guide the best, is probably going to win. If the wind, this was the tournament wind and needed very, very little curl. You could see that my ball guide was pretty much set up here towards the right. This is pretty much exactly how I did. And I just used just a little bit of curl just to get the ball basically, just barely moving over towards the hole to make sure that it misses the sand. But it required very, very little. And alternatively, if you don't have this Epoch 6 or 7, your landing zone again is going to have to change. So let's talk about one more case here, which is going to be right at the min line. So on this min line case, you'll just use the max number for this. In fact, all these headwind cases here are all going to be max. So regardless if it's you're always going to just crank up the backspin as much as you can on either blue or red line. It doesn't matter. So you'll always use max backspin and just kind of tweak your land zone. So what I can do with the Epoch 6 and the Thor 4, for instance, or Thor 5, is I can just sit it right at this min line here, and I can still use my max backspin value, which will be about 6.5, and it should be enough to still stop it here. However, you're going to be landing so close to this rough, that's why the shot becomes so much more challenging. And what you'll typically do for the adjustments in this case is a lot closer to max in most cases, but there's still potential that you could be as high as max plus 10%, just depending on how high that wind gets up. As I mentioned, you'll have to be very close to the rough here and probably some curl, but just keep in mind wind effect, and the person that plays that wind effect the better. For instance, you might have to tweak this ball guide into the bunker for a right to left wind, and then once the wind affects it, it should drift it over towards the hole with that offset. Even naturally, you won't even need curl. However, the opposite could happen, where you could get a left to right wind. You might need to go max curl and max side spin, max everything, and it still may land in the sand. So you have to be very aggressive with that line and land, as close as possible to that rough to actually get it over in that case. So good luck with this hole. It's very, very challenging from this tee box, but hopefully, this guide will give you, all the tools. Study this up, and then you can go watch some of my live shots that I hit, and then you can start to kind of hone in on this for yourself. So good luck and see you guys on the next hole.